She texted wrong number about her date. 5 minutes later, Mafia boss replied, "Send the address." The steam rising from the industrial espresso machine at the grind was doing nothing to help the frizz in Ava Collins's hair. Nor was it alleviating the pounding headache centered right behind her eyes. It was 5 in the afternoon on a Friday, the end of a double shift that felt like it had lasted a decade. Ava wiped the counter with a rag that had seen better days, her movements automatic. At 27 years old, she had expected her life to look different than this. She had imagined a career in graphic design, a savings account with more than 3 digits, and an apartment that did not smell like her neighbor's boiled cabbage. Instead, she was the head barista at a mid-tier coffee shop in Harborview, a city where the divide between the glistening waterfront high-rises and the struggling working-class blocks was as sharp as a knife edge. "Order for Mike," she called out, sliding a latte across the counter. As the customer took the cup without a thank you, Ava checked the time on her phone. She had exactly 1 hour to get home, shower, and transform herself into someone who did not smell like roasted beans and almond milk. Tonight was important. Tonight was a date. It had been 6 months since Tyler. Even thinking his name made her stomach turn. Tyler, with his devastating smile and his gambling problem, the man who had left her with a shattered heart and $5,000 in credit card debt she was still clawing her way out of. He had stripped her of her trust, leaving her wary and exhausted. But Jason Cole was different. Or at least, she hoped he was. They had matched on a dating app 3 weeks ago. Jason was charming, consistent, and had a smile that seemed genuine in his photos. He worked in logistics, whatever that meant, and he had suggested dinner at the Gilded Lily, an upscale Italian place downtown that Ava could never afford on her own. It felt like a fresh start, a chance to remember what it felt like to be a woman, not just a machine that dispensed caffeine and paid bills. 45 minutes later, Ava stood in front of the warped full-length mirror in her tiny bathroom. The steam from her shower still clung to the glass. She wore a simple red slip dress she had bought on sale 2 years ago. It was the nicest thing she owned, hugging her curves in a way that made her feel brave. She applied a coat of lipstick, smoothed her dark hair back, and took a deep breath. "You can do this, Ava," she whispered to her reflection. "Just one dinner. Just be normal." She grabbed her purse and checked her phone. Her best friend, Jenna, had been demanding updates all day. Ava's fingers flew across the screen, her thumbs typing rapidly as she headed out the door and down the 3 flights of stairs to the street. She typed, "Heading out now. If I don't come back, it is because he is too hot. Meeting Jason Cole at the Gilded Lily. Wish me luck." She hit send as she pushed open the heavy front door of her building, stepping into the cool Harborview evening. She did not look at the number she had selected. In her haste, her thumb had slipped. Entering a digit 1 number off from Jenna's, the message whooshed away, delivered to a stranger, high above the grime of the streets, in the penthouse office of the Romano Tower. The air was cold and smelled of expensive leather and ozone. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the harbor, where cargo ships moved like silent ghosts across the dark water. Nico Romano sat at the head of a mahogany table that cost more than most people earned in a year. At 32, Nico was the youngest Don the Romano family had ever seen, and arguably the most ruthless. He wore a charcoal suit tailored to perfection, his dark hair swept back from a face that was all sharp angles and cold calculation. The room was tense. 3 of his lieutenants sat opposite him, shifting uncomfortably. "Marcus Vance is getting bold." One of them, a thick-necked man named Sal, said, his voice low. "He moved 2 shipments through the West Docks last night. That is our territory. Nico, if we don't push back, we look weak." Nico didn't blink. He spun a heavy crystal tumbler of whiskey on the table, watching the amber liquid swirl. "Marcus is desperate," Nico said, his voice a smooth, dangerous baritone. "Desperate men make mistakes. We don't react to noise. We wait for the slip." "He is recruiting," Sal pressed, "pulling in street-level guys, beefing up his numbers." Nico's phone, resting face up on the table, buzzed. The sound was sharp in the quiet room. Nico frowned. Only 5 people had this number, and none of them would interrupt a meeting unless the building was on fire. He glanced down, expecting an emergency update from his security team. Instead, he saw a text from an unknown number. Heading out now. If I don't come back, it is because he is too hot. Meeting Jason Cole at the Gilded Lily. Wish me luck. Nico stared at the screen. For a second, he thought it was a code, a message from an informant. Then the absurdity of it registered. It was a mistake, a wrong number from some woman gushing to her friend. He reached out to delete it, his thumb hovering over the screen, but then his eyes snagged on the name. Jason Cole. Nico's eyes narrowed. He knew that name. Jason Cole was a low-level hustler, a bottom feeder who had recently been flagged by Nico's intelligence network. He was a recruiter for Marcus Vance's operation, specifically, the part of the operation that dealt in human trafficking. Vance used guys like Cole to lure women in, charm them, and then leverage them into debts they couldn't pay. Or worse, drug them and ship them out before anyone knew they were missing. And the location. The Gilded Lily. It was a legitimate restaurant front, but the basement was a laundering hub for Vance's cash flow. A cold knot tightened in Nico's chest. He did not know the woman who had sent this text, but he knew exactly what was walking into that trap. It was a Friday night. The Gilded Lily would be packed, the perfect cover for slipping something into a drink. He should ignore it. It wasn't his business. He had a war to plan, an empire to maintain. Saving one naive girl who didn't know how to check a phone number was not part of his job description. But the image of a woman in a red dress, he imagined it red, for some reason, walking smiling into the arms of a monster like Jason Cole agitated him. It sparked a strange, protective fury he hadn't felt in years. The lieutenants were watching him, waiting for his command on the docks. Nico ignored them. He picked up the phone. He typed, "Wrong number. Who is this?" He needed to confirm she was real, that this wasn't some bizarre setup. A moment later, the reply came. "Oh my God, I am so sorry. I meant to text Jenna. Ignore that, I am just nervous. Pretend you never saw it." She was embarrassed. Innocent. She had no idea she was stepping into a viper's nest. Nico looked at the city lights below. He could let it go. He could put the phone down and let fate take its course. But Nico Romano was a man who controlled fate, not one who submitted to it. And Jason Cole operating this openly, targeting civilians in his city, was an insult. He typed back, his thumbs moving with decisive force. "Send the address." He waited. The 3 dots of her typing bubble appeared, then vanished, then appeared again. She was hesitating. Good. She had some survival instincts. "Why?" she replied. Nico didn't have time for games, because the man you are meeting is not who you think he is. Send the address. Now. He set the phone down and looked up at Sal. "Get the car," Nico ordered. Standing up. The meeting was over. "Boss?" Sal looked confused. "What about the docks?" "The docks can wait," Nico said, buttoning his suit jacket. "Luca, you're with me. I need everything we have on Jason Cole on my tablet by the time we hit the street." Luca, his right-hand man and the only person Nico trusted with his life, nodded once and tapped his earpiece. "On it." Nico checked his phone one last time. A new message had popped up. Just a location pin for the Gilded Lily. She had sent it. Nico felt a grim satisfaction. He walked to the private elevator, his stride eating up the distance. He wasn't just going to break up a date. He was going to send a message to Marcus Vance that would be loud enough to hear all the way across the city. The Gilded Lily was dim, smelling of truffle oil and expensive perfume. Ava sat in a velvet booth, clutching her menu like a shield. Her heart was still hammering against her ribs, but not because of Jason. It was because of the text conversation she had just had with a complete stranger. Send the address. The command had been so authoritative, so chillingly direct, that she had obeyed it almost without thinking. Jenna would have told her she was crazy. Jenna would have told her she was inviting a stalker to her date, but something about the stranger's tone, even over text, had triggered a primal alarm bell in her brain. The man you are meeting is not who you think he is. She looked across the table at Jason. He was undeniably handsome. He wore a navy suit that fit him well, and his hair was styled with precision. He had greeted her with a bouquet of lilies and a compliment about her dress that felt practiced but nice. "You look tense." "Ava," Jason said, his voice smooth like warm honey. He reached across the table, his fingers brushing the back of her hand. "Rough week?" Ava forced a smile, pulling her hand back slightly to reach for her water glass. "Just a long shift. I manage a coffee shop downtown. It gets chaotic." "I bet," Jason said. His eyes didn't seem to be looking at her face, but rather assessing her, scanning her like an item on a shelf. "You live around there? Downtown?" "A few blocks away," Ava said. "Alone?" The question was casual, but the beat of silence after it felt heavy. "I have a cat," Ava deflected, trying to keep the mood light. "Mr. Whiskers. He's very protective." Jason laughed, but the sound didn't reach his eyes. "A protective cat. Cute, but no roommate? No boyfriend lurking in the background?" "No," Ava said, feeling that knot of unease tighten in her stomach. "Just me?" "That must be lonely," Jason said, leaning in. "A beautiful woman like you. All alone in the city. You need someone to take care of you. Ava. Someone to spoil you." It was the kind of line that was supposed to be romantic, but it made the hair on Ava's arms stand up. It reminded her of Tyler, of the way he used to talk right before he asked for money. But Jason wasn't asking for money. He was offering what? "I can take care of myself," Ava said, a little sharper than she intended. Jason's smile didn't waver. "I like a woman with spirit. Let's get a drink to take the edge off. You like wine or something stronger?" "Just white wine is fine," Ava said. "I will be right back," Jason said, sliding out of the booth. "I need to talk to the waiter about the vintage. I want tonight to be perfect." He walked toward the bar. Ava watched him go, feeling a strange mixture of relief and dread. She checked her phone under the table. No new messages from the stranger. No new messages from Jenna. She felt incredibly exposed. "Maybe I should just leave," she thought. "I can say I feel sick," but the rent notice on her kitchen counter flashed in her mind. She was so tired of being alone, so tired of struggling. Jason was successful. He was interested. Maybe she was just projecting her trauma onto him. Maybe she was self-sabotaging again. The front door of the restaurant opened, letting in a gust of cool night air. The atmosphere in the room changed instantly. It was as if the oxygen had been sucked out. The low hum of conversation faltered, then died down to hushed whispers. Ava looked up toward the entrance. 3 men had walked in. They were dressed in dark suits, but not the office worker kind. These suits were bespoke, cut to accommodate shoulder holsters. The 2 men in the back were large, scanning the room with professional indifference. But the man in the front, he was breathtaking in a terrifying way. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a presence that commanded the space around him without him saying a word. His face was severe, handsome and hard, with dark eyes that swept over the dining room like searchlights. Ava felt her breath catch. She recognized him. Everyone in Harborview recognized him, even if they only saw him in grainy paparazzi photos or on the evening news during segments about organized crime. Nico Romano, the head of the Romano crime family. Why was he here? Ava shrank back into her booth, hoping to become invisible. Men like Nico Romano did not eat at places like this. They owned places like this, or they burned them down. Nico's gaze moved methodically across the tables. Then, it locked onto her. For a second, Ava felt paralyzed. The intensity of his stare was physical, a weight pressing against her chest. He looked at her not with predatory hunger, but with recognition. It's him. She realized with a jolt of shock that nearly stopped her heart. The wrong number. She looked from him to her phone, then back to him. It was impossible. But the way he was looking at her, it was the only explanation. Nico did not move toward her immediately. His eyes shifted away, tracking something else. Ava followed his gaze toward the bar. Jason was there, standing with his back to the room. He had 2 glasses of wine on the counter. As Ava watched, She saw Jason's hand hover over one of the glasses. A small, clear vial appeared in his palm. With a quick, practiced motion, he tipped a drop of liquid into the wine, swirled the glass, and slipped the vial back into his pocket. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Ava's blood ran cold. He had drugged her drink. He was going to drug her. Jason picked up the glasses and turned around, a bright, fake smile plastered on his face. He didn't see Nico. He only saw Ava. He started walking back toward the booth. Ava wanted to scream, to run, but her limbs felt like lead. She watched Jason approach, the poisoned chalice in his hand. "Here we go," Jason said, sliding back into the booth. He placed the glass in front of her. The liquid looked perfectly innocent. A toast to new beginnings. He raised his own glass. Ava stared at the wine. Her throat was closed tight. She couldn't breathe. "Drink up," Jason encouraged, his eyes gleaming with anticipation. Trembling, Ava reached for the stem of the glass. She didn't know what else to do. If she accused him, would he get violent? If she ran, would he chase her? "Is something wrong?" Jason asked, his voice dropping an octave. "No," Ava whispered. She lifted the glass. Suddenly, a large hand reached into her field of vision. It was a hand with long, elegant fingers and scarred knuckles. It clamped over the top of her glass, stopping at inches from her lips. Ava looked up. Nico Romano stood beside their table, up close. He was even more imposing. He smelled of expensive cologne, gun oil, and cold fury. He wasn't looking at Ava. He was looking at Jason. Jason froze, his smile faltering. "Can I help you?" he asked, trying to sound confident but failing. His eyes darted to the two men standing behind Nico, effectively blocking the path to the exit. "You can stand up," Nico said. His voice was not loud. It was a low rumble, calm and completely terrifying. "And you can walk out of here with my men?" "Excuse me?" Jason sputtered. "I am on a date. Who do you think you are?" Nico didn't answer. He simply tightened his grip on Ava's glass, took it from her shaking hand, and set it down on the table with a decisive clink. "The lady is not thirsty," Nico said. "This is harassment," Jason said, starting to rise, his face flushing red. "I am calling the manager." "The manager is in the kitchen," Nico said, his eyes bored into Jason's. "And he is not going to help you. You have two choices, Jason. You walk out the front door quietly, or my men drag you out the back. Either way, this date is over." Jason blanched. "How do you know my name?" Nico leaned down, bracing one hand on the table. He was so close that Ava could see the faint pulse in his jaw. "I know who you work for," Nico murmured, loud enough only for the three of them to hear. "And I know what you put in that drink." Jason's face went white. He looked at the wine, then at Ava, then back at Nico. The realization dawned on him. He had been caught by the apex predator of the city. I didn't," Jason stammered. "Move," Nico commanded. It wasn't a suggestion. Jason scrambled out of the booth, knocking his hip against the table in his haste. Nico's two men stepped forward, flanking Jason instantly, gripping his arms with bruising force. They began to march him toward the exit, efficient and silent. The restaurant had gone deadly quiet. Every eye was on them. Ava sat frozen in the booth, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She looked at the glass of wine, then slowly lifted her gaze to Nico. He was standing there, adjusting his cufflinks, looking entirely unruffled by the scene he had just caused. He looked down at her. His expression was unreadable, a mask of stone. But for a fleeting second, something softened in his dark eyes. "Are you okay?" he asked. Ava opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She nodded, a jerky, terrified motion. Nico reached out and picked up the glass of wine he had taken from her. He held it up to the light, inspecting it for a moment, then poured the contents onto the floor. The red liquid splashed onto the expensive carpet like blood. "Come on," Nico said, extending a hand toward her. "We are leaving." "Leaving?" Ava managed to whisper. "Where?" "Anywhere but here," Nico replied. "Get your coat." "Ava," she stared at his hand. It was steady, strong, and offering a lifeline she wasn't sure she should take. But looking at the empty seat where Jason had been, and the spilled wine that could have ended her life as she knew it, Ava realized she didn't have a choice. She reached out and placed her hand in his. The air inside the gilded lily felt suddenly thin, as if the oxygen had been siphoned out by the sheer force of Nico Romano's presence. Ava stood frozen by the table, her hand still hovering where her wineglass had been just moments before. The stain of the spilled Merlot was spreading across the white tablecloth like a dark omen. Nico leaned in closer to her, invading her personal space in a way that felt both terrifying and strangely grounding. He did not look at the other diners, nor did he look at the staff who were studiously avoiding eye contact. His dark eyes were locked on hers, demanding her absolute focus. That drink was not just wine. Ava, Nico said. His voice was low, a rumble of thunder contained within his chest. Unshakably calm, yet heavy with implication. I watched him slip a vial into it while you were looking at the menu. If you had taken even a sip, you would not be walking out of here on your own 2 feet tonight. Ava felt the blood drain from her face. Her knees wobbled, threatening to buckle. She looked from Nico to the empty glass on the table, her mind struggling to bridge the gap between the mundane date she thought she was on and the horror he was describing. "No," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "That is, we matched on an app. He brought me flowers." It was a naive defense, and she knew it the moment the words left her lips. She sounded like a child trying to explain away a monster under the bed. "Monsters buy flowers, too," Nico said simply. He turned his head slightly, his gaze shifting to where Jason Cole was being boxed in by Nico's 2 large associates near the entrance. Jason was trying to salvage the situation, putting on a show of wounded indignation that was almost impressive in its audacity. He smoothed the lapels of his suit jacket, raising his voice so the nearby tables could hear. "This is ridiculous," Jason shouted, pointing a shaking finger at Nico. "I do not know who you think you are, dragging a man away from his dinner. I am going to call the police." Nico's expression did not change. He merely nodded to his men. "There is a private matter to settle," Nico announced to the room at large. His tone was polite but laced with a razor-sharp edge that dared anyone to object. "We apologize for the disturbance. Dinner is on the house for everyone tonight." The tension in the room broke instantly as the patrons, realizing their meals were free and that their safety depended on ignorance, turned back to their plates. They pretended not to see the way Nico's men gripped Jason by the elbows, lifting him almost off his feet. They pretended not to hear Jason's sudden, choked gasp as one of the men applied pressure to a nerve cluster in his arm. "Let's go," Nico said to Ava, placing a hand on the small of her back. The heat of his palm seared through the thin fabric of her red dress. Ava moved automatically, her body numb. As they walked toward the exit, she saw Jason being hauled out the side door, his feet dragging, his face pale and slick with sweat. The reality of it crashed into her, the proximity of the danger, the ugliness that had been hiding behind a charming smile. Her hands began to shake violently. Outside. The cool night air of Harborview hit her face, but it did nothing to settle her stomach. A sleek black sedan was idling at the curb, its engine purring like a large cat. A driver stood by the open rear door. "Get in," Nico instructed gently. "Wait for me. It will only take a moment." "Where are you going?" Ava asked, her voice trembling. "To clarify a few things with your date," Nico replied. He did not wait for an answer, turning on his heel and disappearing around the corner of the building where his men had taken Jason. Ava sank into the leather back seat of the car. It smelled of cedar and expensive leather. She hugged her arms around herself, trying to stop the shivering. She was a barista who worried about rent and latte art. She was not someone who got caught in the middle of mob disputes. She squeezed her eyes shut, replaying the moment Nico's hand had covered her glass. In the alleyway behind the restaurant, the atmosphere was far less refined. Jason Cole had been thrown against the brick wall, his expensive suit scuffed and dirty. He was gasping for air, clutching his ribs where he had been struck. Just once, but with professional precision. Nico walked into the alley, adjusting his cuffs. He did not look angry. He looked disappointed, like a teacher dealing with a slow student, which was infinitely more terrifying. "Talk," Nico said. "I don't know what you want." Jason wheezed. "It was just a date. I liked her." Nico stepped forward, invading Jason's space until the other man shrank back against the bricks. "Do not lie to me, Jason. You work for Marcus Vance. The Gilded Lily is his laundering front, and that vial in your pocket is not for recreational use. What was the plan?" Jason hesitated, his eyes darting to the two enforcers flanking Nico. He realized there was no way out. "It wasn't just her," Jason stammered, his voice breaking. "Marcus, he is hosting a party tonight, a private thing, high rollers from out of town. He wanted company, fresh faces, girls who wouldn't be missed right away." Nico's jaw tightened. A private party, trafficking. It was exactly as he had suspected. Marcus was escalating, moving from drugs and protection into selling people. And he was doing it in Nico's city. "And Ava?" Nico asked, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "She was the main course?" "She was just available," Jason admitted, shrinking away from the cold fire in Nico's eyes. "She seemed lonely. Easy to manage." Nico felt a surge of violence that he had to physically push down. He wanted to end Jason right there. But Jason was a messenger, a pawn. Killing him would be messy and strategic suicide right now. "Get him out of my sight," Nico ordered his men. "Dump him at the nearest hospital entrance. And Jason?" Jason looked up, hope and terror warring in his eyes. "Tell Marcus that if I see his recruiters in my territory again, I will not be sending them back to him walking. And tell him the girl is off limits. She's under my protection now." Nico turned and walked away, leaving Jason sliding down the wall in relief. As he walked back to the car, Nico's mind was racing. He had intervened to stop a crime, but in doing so, he had complicated everything. By saving Ava, he had marked her. Marcus would know that Nico Romano had stepped in personally for a random barista. Marcus would wonder why. He would think she was important. Nico cursed under his breath. He had just painted a target on the back of a woman whose only crime was texting the wrong number. He slid into the back seat of the sedan, closing the door and sealing out the noise of the city. Ava jumped slightly as he entered. She was pressed against the far door, her eyes wide and wary. "Is he—" she started, unable to finish the sentence. "He will live," Nico said, brushing a speck of dust from his sleeve. "He has been encouraged to rethink his career choices." "Who are you?" Ava demanded suddenly. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a frantic need for answers. "People do not just drag other people into alleys. The staff inside, they were terrified of you. You are not just some guy who got a wrong number text." Nico looked at her. In the dim light of the passing street lamps, she looked fragile but fierce. Her red dress was wrinkled, and a strand of hair had fallen across her face. He had an urge to tuck it behind her ear, but he kept his hands on his lap. "I am a businessman," Nico said. It was the standard lie. "Bullshit," Ava snapped. "Businessmen deal in stocks and spreadsheets. You deal in this." She waved a hand vaguely at the dark-tinted windows and the silent driver in the front. Nico sighed. "I handle problems. Ava, Harborview has a lot of problems. Sometimes the law is not equipped to deal with them quickly enough. I fill the gaps." "You are the mob," she said, the word hanging heavy in the air. "I've seen you on the news. Romano, that is your name." "Nico," he corrected. "Just Nico to you." "Why did you come?" she asked, her voice cracking. "You could have just blocked my number." "Why drive all the way down here for a stranger?" Nico looked out the window at the passing city. Why indeed, it was reckless. It was stupid. "Because I knew Jason's name," he said, deciding on a half-truth. "I knew what he does. I could not sit in my office and let a woman walk into a trap, no matter who she was. You were just unlucky enough to catch my attention." "Unlucky," Ava echoed. She let out a short, hysterical laugh. "That is the story of my life. Where do you live?" Nico asked. "I'm taking you home. You should not be alone right now." Ava hesitated, but the fight drained out of her. She gave him her address, a small apartment building in a working-class neighborhood on the edge of the district. The drive was silent and heavy. Ava hugged her coat tighter around herself, sneaking glances at the man beside her. He was terrifying. Yes, The violence he commanded was obvious in the way he carried himself. But she couldn't stop looking at his hands on his knees, strong, steady hands that had stopped her from drinking poison. She noticed a faint, jagged scar running along his jawline, a testament to a life she couldn't imagine. She saw the glint of a watch on his wrist that probably cost more than her entire college education. He didn't fit into her world. He was a shark swimming in a goldfish bowl, and yet there was a strange gravity to him, a pull she couldn't explain. He had saved her. He was a criminal, a monster perhaps, but he was the monster who had saved her from the other monster. "You have a question," Nico said, not looking at her. "How did you know?" Ava asked. "I can hear you thinking. It is loud." "Do you do this often?" she asked. "Rescue women from bad dates?" Nico turned to her, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It transformed his face, making him look younger, less severe. "Only the ones who text me by mistake." It was a joke. An awkward, dry joke, but it startled a small laugh out of her. The tension in the car eased. "Just a fraction. I suppose I should be grateful I have fat thumbs," Ava murmured. "I suppose so," Nico agreed. The car pulled up to the curb in front of her building. It was a brick walk-up with peeling paint and a flickering light above the entrance. It looked shabby compared to the sleek luxury of Nico's car. The driver got out to open the door, but Nico opened it himself. He stepped out onto the sidewalk and offered a hand to help her out. Ava took it. His grip was warm and firm. As she stood up, she found herself standing very close to him. He was tall, towering over her. She had to tilt her head back to look him in the eye. "Thank you," Ava said. Her voice shook again, the adrenaline crash finally hitting her. "I mean it. Thank you." "Do not thank me," Nico said gruffly. "Just be smarter next time. Check the number." "I will," she promised. She turned to go, but Nico reached out, catching her arm gently. It wasn't a forceful grip, it was a tether. Ava froze, looking back at him. Nico's eyes were searching her face, tracing the curve of her cheek, the fear still lingering in her pupils. For a second, the mask of the cold Mafia dawn slipped. His eyes softened, revealing a depth of exhaustion and loneliness that startled her. "You deserve better than guys like Jason," Nico said softly. "Do not let the loneliness make you settle for garbage. You are worth more than that." The air between them seemed to vibrate. The sounds of the city faded away. The distant sirens, the hum of traffic. There was only the heat of his hand on her arm and the intensity of his gaze dropping to her lips. Ava's breath hitched. She felt an insane, magnetic pull to lean in, to close the scant inches between them. She wanted to know what he tasted like. She wanted to know if the danger that radiated off him would burn or protect. Nico leaned in, just an inch. Ava's lips parted. Then he blinked, and the wall slammed back down. He released her arm abruptly, stepping back as if he had been burned. "Go inside, Ava," he said, his voice rough. "Lock the door." Before she could say anything else, he turned and got back into the car. The door slammed shut, and the black sedan peeled away from the curb, disappearing into the shadows of the night. Ava stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, touching the spot on her arm where his hand had been. It still felt warm. 2 hours later, Nico sat in his penthouse study. The room was dark, lit only by the glow of his laptop screen and the city lights outside. He had a glass of amber whiskey in his hand, untouched. On the screen was a file, Ava Marie Collins. He knew he shouldn't have looked. It was a breach of privacy, a line he usually didn't cross with civilians, but he couldn't help himself. He needed to know who she was. The file was painfully ordinary. Born in Harborview, parents divorced, high school track team, some community college credits, no degree, works at the Grind coffee shop. Then there were the sadder details, a credit report showing $5,000 in debt, all recent, a police report from 6 months ago, a domestic disturbance call. Her ex-boyfriend, Tyler, had smashed a window during an argument, no charges filed. She was normal. She was struggling. She was drowning in the kind of mundane, crushing problems that people in his world solved with a single phone call or a bullet. She was vulnerable. "She is nobody," Nico said aloud to the empty room. "Just a barista." He took a drink of the whiskey, the burn welcome in his throat. He needed to forget her. He had saved her, scared off the predator, and done his good deed for the decade. Involvement with him would only bring her darkness. Marcus Vance was already a threat. If Nico kept her close, she would become a casualty. "Forget her," he commanded himself. "By morning, she will just be a story you tell." He closed the laptop with a snap. Ava lay in her bed, staring at the ceiling. Her red dress was crumpled on the floor. She'd scrubbed her face 3 times, trying to wash away the feeling of the night. But the memory of Nico's eyes wouldn't leave her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw him. The way he had looked at Jason, like a god judging a sinner. The way he had looked at her, like something precious he wasn't allowed to touch. She rolled over and grabbed her phone from the nightstand. She opened the message thread. Send the address. It was still the last message. She began to type. "Who are you really? Why did you look at me like that? Delete. I am scared. Jason knows where I live. Are you watching him? Delete. Can I see you again? Delete. That was insane." She couldn't ask that. She took a deep breath and typed a simple truth. "Thank you for coming. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't replied." She hit send before she could lose her nerve. 3 miles away, Nico's phone lit up on the mahogany desk. He saw the preview. He stared at it. His thumb hovered over the keyboard. He wanted to tell her she was welcome. He wanted to tell her to sleep well. He wanted to tell her he was still thinking about how she looked in that red dress. Instead, he typed the only thing that would keep her safe. "Be careful who you trust. Harborview isn't kind to the careless." He hit send and turned his phone face down. Ava read the reply. It was cryptic. It was cold. But it was also protective. It was a warning from a wolf telling the lamb to stay away from the forest. She felt a strange mix of frustration and comfort. He was pushing her away, but he was also watching out for her. She turned off the lamp and curled onto her side, clutching her pillow. Sleep came quickly, but it wasn't peaceful. The dream was vivid, saturated in color. She was back at the Gilded Lily, but the restaurant was empty. The lights were dim. Jason was there, his hand heavy and hot on her thigh, squeezing until it hurt. He was smiling, his teeth too sharp, too white. "Drink up, Ava," he whispered. She looked down at her hand. She was holding the glass of wine. The liquid was swirling, dark and thick like blood. She couldn't move her arm to put it down. She raised it to her lips against her will. Then a shadow fell over them. Nico was there. He stood behind her, his chest a solid wall of heat against her back. His hand came down on her shoulder, his fingers digging in, grounding her, stopping the trembling. "Mine," Nico whispered. He didn't speak to Jason, he simply existed, and Jason dissolved into smoke, blown away by an unseen wind. The dream shifted. Ava wasn't afraid anymore. She leaned back against Nico. He wrapped his arms around her, his suit rough against her bare skin. He lowered his head, his face burying in the crook of her neck. She could feel his breath, warm and rhythmic, against her ear. "You deserve better," he murmured, his voice vibrating through her spine. He turned her around. His eyes were gold and black, burning with a hunger that made her knees weak. He lowered his mouth to hers. Ava woke up with a gasp, sitting bolt upright in bed. Her heart was racing, pounding a frantic rhythm against her ribs. Her skin was flushed, hot to the touch. She pressed her hands to her burning cheeks, breathing hard in the quiet darkness of her room. She was ashamed. After everything that had happened, the danger, the near miss with a predator, she shouldn't be dreaming about the dangerous man who had saved her. She shouldn't be wanting his touch. But as she lay back down, pulling the covers up to her chin, she knew the truth. She wanted him to text back. She wanted to see the scar on his jaw again. And that desire scared her more than Jason Cole ever could. 3 days had passed since the incident at the Gilded Lily, and Ava Collins was doing her best to pretend that her life hadn't nearly imploded. She threw herself into work, picking up 2 extra closing shifts at the grind, effectively burying herself in the noise of grinding beans and the hiss of steam wands. Exhaustion was a better companion than fear. Whenever the bell above the cafe door chimed after dark, Ava flinched, her eyes snapping to the entrance with a hunted look before she could mask it with a customer service smile. Jenna had called 5 times, demanding details about the date. Ava had lied through her teeth, claiming Jason was boring and that the wrong number text was just a funny glitch. Nothing more. She downplayed the terror that still sat cold in her gut, afraid that speaking it aloud would make it real again. But the city outside the cafe windows felt different now. The shadows seemed longer, the passing cars more ominous. Ava found herself checking over her shoulder constantly, the memory of Nico Romano's cryptic warning playing on a loop in her head. Harborview isn't kind to the careless. Across the city, in a warehouse district that smelled of salt and diesel, Nico Romano was not pretending. He was working. He stood in the center of a makeshift interrogation room, a sterile office in the back of a shipping container, listening to Luca report. Luca looked grim, holding a tablet with the latest intelligence from the street. "Jason Cole is out of the hospital," Luca said, scrolling through the text. "Broken ribs, bruised ego, but he is talking. We have chatter from 3 different informants." Nico leaned back against the metal desk, crossing his arms. "What is he saying?" "He's trying to save face with Marcus's crew," Luca explained. "He's telling them that he was set up, and he is talking about the girl. He is calling Ava the one who got away. He says she is a loose end, a witness who saw too much." Nico's expression darkened, the temperature in the room seeming to drop. "The one who got away," he repeated, the words tasting like ash. "Marcus is paranoid," Luca continued. "He thinks you intervened because she is yours. If he thinks she is important to you, she becomes a target. If he thinks she is just a civilian witness, she is a liability. Either way, she is on the map now." Nico cursed silently. He had tried to be surgical, get in, stop the threat, get out, but in this world, there was no such thing as a clean cut. Every action bled into the next. By saving Ava, he had inadvertently tethered her to him. "Keep a tail on Jason," Nico ordered, pushing off the desk, "and double the surveillance on Marcus's main club. I need to go." "Where?" Luca asked, though he already looked like he knew the answer. "To get coffee," Nico said, grabbing his keys. It was 15 minutes to closing. The grind was empty, save for an elderly man reading a newspaper in the corner, and Ava, who was wiping down the pastry case with aggressive thoroughness. The bell chimed. Ava froze, her grip tightening on the rag. She looked up, preparing to tell the latecomer that they were closing soon, but the words died in her throat. Nico Romano walked in. He looked out of place among the mismatched furniture and chalkboard menus. He was wearing a black trench coat over a dark suit, looking like a storm cloud that had drifted indoors. His presence instantly made the cozy shop feel small and fragile. Ava's heart hammered a frantic rhythm against her ribs. She looked around, realizing she was practically alone. "We are closed," she said, her voice sounding breathless. Nico walked to the counter, his movements fluid and silent. "The sign says open until 10. It is 9:45. He rested his hands on the counter. No rings, just clean, dangerous hands. Ava remembered the heat of them on her arm. "What do you want?" Ava asked, trying to summon the anger she felt she deserved to feel. "Did you come to drag me out of here too?" "Just coffee," Nico said calmly. "Black." Ava stared at him for a beat, then turned to the machine. Her hands were shaking as she pulled the shot. She focused on the mechanics, tamp, lock, brew, trying to steady herself. Why was he here? Was he stalking her? She slid the cup across the counter. $3. Nico placed a $20 bill on the counter and didn't wait for change. He didn't drink the coffee either. He just stood there, watching her. "Jason Cole is talking," Nico said without preamble. Ava stopped wiping the counter. The blood drained from her face. "Talking about what?" "About you," Nico said. His voice was low, ensuring the old man in the corner couldn't hear. "He is embarrassed that he got caught. He's making you out to be a problem that needs solving." "A problem?" Ava's voice rose an octave. "I am the victim. He tried to drug me. In my world, victims are just loose ends, Nico said, his eyes hard. I handled him for the night, Ava. But there is still risk. Marcus Vance is not someone who lets things go. Your world, Ava scoffed, abandoning the rag. She leaned over the counter, anger overriding her fear. That is the problem, isn't it? I didn't ask to be in your world. I was just going on a date, and now you show up at my job telling me I am a target? Who gave you the right to control my life? I am trying to keep you alive, Nico countered, his voice staying maddeningly level. You are naive. Ava, you think the police can fix this? You think a restraining order stops men like Marcus? I think men like you are all the same, Ava shot back. You just want to move people around like chess pieces. Jason wanted to use me. You want to, what, manage me? I am not a piece of your territory. Nico. They were standing close now, leaning over the barrier of the counter. Their faces were inches apart. Ava could see the flecks of gold in his dark irises, the slight flare of his nostrils. The air between them crackled with a tension that was half rage, half something else entirely. It was a pounding awareness, a magnetic pull that made her want to slap him and kiss him all at once. Suddenly, the hum of the refrigerator died. The overhead lights blinked once and went out. Pitch blackness swallowed the cafe. Ava gasped, instinctively stepping back. Her foot caught on the rubber floor mat, and she stumbled. Ava! Nico's voice came out of the dark, sharp and immediate. Strong hands caught her by the waist before she could fall. He pulled her forward to steady her, and she collided with his chest. It was solid, warm, and smelled of rain and expensive wool. For a moment, neither of them moved. The silence in the cafe was absolute. The only light came from the street lamps outside, casting long, pale stripes across the floor. Ava's hands had flown up to brace herself, clutching the lapels of his coat. She could feel the steady thrum of his heart beneath her palms. His hands were still on her waist, his thumbs pressing into the curve of her hip through her apron. "Are you okay?" he whispered. His voice was a rumble she felt more than heard. The breaker trips sometimes," Ava breathed. Her voice was shaky. She looked up. In the dim light, she could just make out the sharp line of his jaw, the curve of his mouth. He was looking down at her. His head tilted. The anger from moments ago had dissolved into something thick and heavy. Nico didn't let go. His thumb brushed against her side, a slow, unconscious caress. Ava's breath hitched. She should pull away. She should tell him to leave. But her body wouldn't obey. She was captivated by the proximity, by the dangerous safety of his arms. She tilted her face up, her lips parting slightly. Nico's gaze dropped to her mouth. He lowered his head, the movement slow, inevitable. She could feel his breath on her cheek, warm and tantalizing. The anticipation was an electric wire pulling taut, ready to snap. Kiss me, she thought, the desire shocking her with its intensity. The lights flickered and blazed back on with a loud buzz. They sprang apart as if physically shoved. Ava grabbed the counter. Breathless and flushed, Nico took a step back, adjusting his coat, his face instantly mask-like again. The old man in the corner folded his newspaper noisily, oblivious to the charged atmosphere. "I should go," Nico said. His voice was rougher than before. "Be careful walking home." He turned and walked out the door without looking back, leaving his coffee steaming on the counter. Ava stood there, her heart racing so fast she thought she might faint. She touched her lips, which tingled as if he had actually kissed her. The walk to her apartment took 20 minutes. Usually, Ava enjoyed the cool air, but tonight every shadow looked like a man in a suit. She turned onto 4th Street, a quieter residential block. A car turned the corner behind her. It was a gray sedan, indistinguishable from 1,000 others, but it was moving slowly, too slowly. Ava walked faster, her grip on her purse tightening until her knuckles turned white. The car matched her pace. Panic spiked in her chest, hot and sharp. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers trembling. She didn't call the police. She didn't call Jenna. Her thumb went straight to the message thread she had stared at for 3 days. She typed, Someone is following me. She hit send and practically ran the last block to her building. Behind her, the gray sedan suddenly accelerated, tires screeching as it peeled away and disappeared down a side street. Ava burst into her lobby, fumbling with her keys. She didn't stop until she was inside her apartment with the deadbolt thrown and the chain latched. She slid down the door, gasping for air. Her phone buzzed. "Where are you?" "Home," she typed back. "Locked in? Stay there," Nico replied. "I'm sending Luca to patrol your block." Ava stared at the screen. He had read it instantly. He had acted instantly. The fear lingering in her veins began to mix with that confusing, treacherous warmth again. He was watching over her. She didn't sleep well. Every creak of the old building made her jump. Around 2 a.m, a loud metallic scratching sound came from the hallway, right outside her door. Ava sat up in bed, paralyzed. It sounded like metal on metal. Someone was picking the lock. She grabbed her phone to dial 911, her fingers clumsy with terror. As she pressed the call button, she heard a shout from the hallway. "Hey, what are you doing?" It was a deep voice, Luca's. There was the sound of a scuffle, heavy boots thudding against the floorboards, and then running footsteps retreating down the stairs. "Police!" Ava screamed into the phone. "Someone tried to break into my apartment." By the time the police arrived 10 minutes later, the hallway was empty. The lock on her door was scratched, but the officers were unimpressed. "Probably just kids or a junkie looking for an open door. Ma'am," the younger officer said, snapping his notebook shut. "We did not see anyone. Just keep your door locked." "Someone was here," Ava insisted, wrapping her robe tighter around herself. "A man stopped him. We didn't see anyone." "Ma'am," the officer repeated with a shrug. "Call us if they come back." They left. Ava stood in her open doorway, feeling small and utterly defenseless. The system that was supposed to protect her had just shrugged and walked away. "They are useless." Ava jumped. Nico was walking up the stairs, taking them 2 at a time. He looked furious. He wasn't wearing his trench coat anymore, just the suit, and his tie was undone. "Nico," she breathed. He reached the landing and inspected her doorframe, tracing the fresh scratches on the lock plate. His jaw clenched so hard a muscle feathered in his cheek. "Luca saw him," Nico said, his voice tight with suppressed rage. "It was one of Marcus's low-level runners. He was not trying to steal your TV. Ava, he was trying to take you." Ava felt the floor tilt. "Take me." "To send a message," Nico said. He turned to her, his eyes blazing. "You cannot stay here. Not tonight. Not until I handle this." "I have nowhere to go," Ava whispered. "Jenna is out of town. My family is not an option." "You are coming with me," Nico said. It wasn't a question. "I can't just—" "Pack a bag, Ava," Nico interrupted. Stepping closer, he looked exhausted and terrifyingly serious. "Please, do not make me carry you out of here. I will not let you sleep behind a door that a child could kick down." Ava looked at him. She saw the fear behind his anger. He was afraid for her. She turned and went into her bedroom. Her hands shook uncontrollably as she threw clothes into a duffel bag, jeans, a t-shirt, her toothbrush. It felt surreal, like she was watching a movie of someone else's life. When she came out, Nico took the bag from her. He led her downstairs to his car, checking every shadow as they moved. Nico's penthouse was a different world. The elevator opened directly into a sprawling living space with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. It was sleek, modern, and beautiful, but it felt cold. It lacked the clutter of a lived-in home. "The guest room is down the hall. Second door on the left," Nico said, setting her bag down. "There is a lock on the inside. You will be safe here. The security system is state-of-the-art." "Thank you," Ava said. Her voice sounded small in the massive room. "Get some sleep," Nico said. He looked like he wanted to say more, but he turned and walked toward the kitchen. Ava went to the guest room. It was luxurious, like a 5-star hotel suite. She showered, scrubbing the fear off her skin, and changed into a pair of sweatpants and an oversized t-shirt. She locked the door, just as he said. But she couldn't sleep. The silence of the penthouse was deafening. She kept thinking about the scratch on her lock, about the police officer's shrug, about Nico's hand on her waist in the dark cafe. At 4 a.m, she gave up. She unlocked her door and crept out into the hallway. A light was on in the kitchen. She followed it. Nico was standing by the island, staring out at the city lights. He had ditched the suit jacket and tie. He was wearing a plain white t-shirt that hugged his shoulders. And for the first time, he looked like a normal man, not a mob boss. He turned as she entered. He didn't look surprised. "Couldn't sleep?" "No," Ava said. She wrapped her arms around herself. "It is too quiet here." "I know the feeling," Nico said. He gestured to the kettle on the stove. "I made tea, chamomile. My mother used to say it cured everything from a cold to a broken heart." Ava walked over and sat on one of the bar stools. Nico poured a mug and slid it across the marble counter. Their fingers brushed as she took it. The contact sent a jolt through her, sharper than the caffeine she served all day. "Thank you," she said softly. She took a sip. It was hot and soothing. "You mentioned your mother. Does she live here too?" Nico let out a dry chuckle. "No. She passed away 10 years ago. She was the only saint in a family of sinners." "I'm sorry," Ava said. "She hated this life," Nico said, looking into his own mug. "She tried to keep me out of it. She wanted me to be an architect. She used to buy me Lego sets and drafting paper." Ava looked at the sharp lines of the penthouse, the cold perfection of it. "You would have been a good architect," she said. "You have an eye for structure." Nico looked at her, surprised. "And you? What did you want to be before you started making lattes?" "A graphic designer," Ava admitted. "My dad left when I was 12. My mom fell apart. I spent a lot of time drawing in my room, creating worlds where things made sense. But art school is expensive, and rent is real. Fear is real too," Nico said quietly. "The first time I realized that was when I was 8. My father came home with a gunshot wound. He didn't go to the hospital. He sat at the kitchen table and dug the bullet out himself. He told me that fear was a weapon. If you are afraid, you are weak. If you make others afraid, you are strong." "He was wrong," Ava said. Nico looked up. "Was he?" "Fear tells you what matters," Ava said. "I was terrified tonight, not because I was weak, but because I value my life. Because I want a future." Nico stared at her. The city lights cast a silhouette across his shoulders, making him look broad and unmovable, but his eyes were open, unguarded in a way she hadn't seen before. "You have a way of cutting through the bullshit." "Ava Collins," he murmured. He reached out his hand across the counter, palm up. It was an invitation, hesitant and unsure. Ava looked at his hand, the hand that had held a gun or the hand that had caught her when she fell. She slowly reached out and placed her hand in his. His fingers closed around hers, warm and rough. He didn't pull her closer. He just held her hand, his thumb tracing the back of her knuckles. The silence in the kitchen changed. It wasn't cold anymore. It was charged, heavy with the electricity that had sparked in the cafe. They locked eyes. For a suspended second, the rest of the world fell away. There was no Marcus, no debt, no danger. Just the man in the t-shirt and the woman who saw him. Nico's gaze drifted to her mouth, then back up to her eyes. He looked like he was in pain, like he wanted to pull her across the counter and bury himself in her, but was holding himself back with a leash of iron will. "You should sleep," Nico said abruptly. He pulled his hand away, the loss of contact leaving Ava's skin feeling cold. He stood up, his face closing off, the mask sliding back into place. "I have work to do," he said, turning his back to her. "Good night, Ava." Ava sat there for a moment, clutching her mug. She felt the rejection, but she also felt the truth of what had just passed between them. He wasn't retreating because he didn't want her. He was retreating because he did. "Good night, Nico," she whispered. She left him standing in the kitchen, a solitary figure against the backdrop of the city he claimed to own, but which seemed to own him. As she walked back to the guest room, she knew one thing for certain. She wasn't just a wrong number anymore. And he wasn't just a stranger. They were in this together now, whether he wanted to admit it or not. 5 days of confinement in the penthouse had blurred into a singular, elongated stretch of time that felt less like hours and more like a suspended breath. Ava Collins had gone from making lattes for commuters to pacing the perimeter of a glass box in the sky, looking down at the city of Harborview like a detached observer. She was not a prisoner. Nico had insisted. She was a guest under protection, but the distinct lack of a key card to the private elevator and the presence of a silent guard named Rocco in the lobby suggested otherwise. Ava tried to fill the silence. She cleaned the kitchen, though it was already spotless. She reorganized the pantry, when boredom finally drove her to explore the living quarters more boldly. She found cracks in Nico Romano's armor. In the study, tucked between leather-bound tomes on strategy and history, she found a shelf of worn paperbacks. They were dog-eared, the spines creased from multiple readings, The Count of Monte Cristo, Great Expectations, stories about reinvention and the cost of ambition. On a small side table, away from the imposing main desk, sat a framed photograph. It showed a teenage boy with dark, brooding eyes standing next to a woman who was laughing with her head thrown back. The woman had Nico's nose and a warmth that radiated through the glass. It was the first proof Ava had seen that he came from something other than stone and violence. Nico was rarely there during the day. He left before she woke and returned late, bringing the smell of the city in with him. But despite his efforts to keep his distance, their lives were beginning to braid together in small, intimate knots. It was in the way she would walk down the hallway and catch the lingering scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something sharper, like ozone, hanging in the air. It was in the way she found his suit jacket draped over the back of her chair at the kitchen island one morning, a silent claim on the space she occupied. One evening, they collided in the narrow corridor leading to the bedrooms. Ava was coming from the kitchen with a glass of water. Nico was heading toward his office. Reading a file, they stopped inches apart. A sudden, breathless halt. "Excuse me," Ava murmured, stepping to the side. "My fault," Nico replied, his voice rough with fatigue. He didn't move immediately. For a heartbeat, they just stood there, the air between them humming with a static charge. Ava looked up at him, noticing the shadows under his eyes and the way his dress shirt was unbuttoned at the collar, revealing the hollow of his throat. He looked at her with a hunger he immediately suppressed, his jaw tightening before he nodded once and brushed past her. The heat of his body radiated against her arm, leaving a phantom touch that kept her awake for hours. The breaking point came on a Tuesday. It was past midnight when the front door opened. Ava was on the sofa, pretending to read one of his paperbacks. She looked up as Nico entered, expecting the usual nod and retreat. Instead, she saw him stumble slightly as he crossed the threshold. He caught himself on the back of the sofa, his knuckles white as he gripped the leather. Ava was on her feet instantly. "Nico?" He waved a hand dismissively. "I am fine. Go to bed. Ava." She ignored him, rounding the sofa to face him. He looked wrecked. His tie was gone. His shirt was torn at the shoulder, and his right hand was wrapped in a handkerchief that was rapidly soaking through with red. Ava flinched. It wasn't the blood that scared her. It was the confirmation. The violence wasn't just a story he told or a rumor on the news. It was real, and it was standing in her living room. "You are bleeding," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "It looks worse than it is," Nico grunted, trying to walk past her. "Just a disagreement that got out of hand." Ava stepped in front of him, blocking his path. "Sit down. I'm cleaning that." "Ava, I do not need—" "Sit down, Nico," she commanded. He looked at her, surprised by the steel in her tone. The exhaustion seemed to win out over his pride. He sank onto the edge of the sofa, letting out a long, ragged breath. Ava ran to the bathroom, grabbing the first aid kit she had located days ago. She returned with a bowl of warm water, antiseptic, and bandages. She knelt between his knees on the rug, the position intimate and submissive, though her actions were anything but. "Give me your hand," she said. Nico extended his injured hand. His knuckles were split, the skin raw and angry. Ava dipped a cloth in the warm water and began to dab away the blood. Her hands were gentle, treating him with a reverence he clearly wasn't used to. She felt the tension in his forearm, the way his muscles were coiled tight as wire. "Who did this?" she whispered, focusing on the wound so she wouldn't have to look at his intense gaze. "Does it matter?" Nico asked. "They are not a problem anymore." Ava swallowed hard. She moved to the tear in his shirt. "I need to check your shoulder." Nico hesitated, then unbuttoned his shirt with his good hand, shrugging it off his shoulders. Ava's breath hitched. His torso was a map of violence. There were faded bruises, old burn marks, and a lattice of scars that told the history of his rise to power. But one stood out, a long, jagged line of pale tissue running along his ribs on the left side, dangerously close to his heart. Without thinking, Ava reached out. Her fingertips traced the ridge of the scar, the skin hot under her touch. "How many times did you almost not make it?" she asked softly. The question hung in the air, heavy and sad. Nico flinched at her touch, a sharp intake of air hissing through his teeth, his composure, usually so impenetrable, cracked. His hand shot out, capturing hers and pressing it flat against his chest, right over the scar, right over the heavy, thudding rhythm of his heart. "Too many," Nico rasped, "but I never had a reason to be afraid of the end. Not until recently." The admission was a physical blow. Ava looked up. They were close, so close she could see the flecks of gold burning in his dark irises. She could smell the iron scent of blood mixed with his cologne. She could feel the heat radiating off him like a furnace. "Nico," she breathed. He leaned in slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to run back to the safety of the guest room. "Tell me to stop," he murmured, his gaze dropping to her lips. "Tell me to leave you alone. Ava." She didn't pull away. Instead, she tilted her head up, her eyes half closing. It was a silent confession, a surrender to the gravitational pull that had been dragging them together since that first text message. "Don't stop," she whispered. Nico groaned low in his throat. He closed the distance, his mouth capturing hers. It wasn't a gentle kiss, it was a collision. It started with a tentative pressure, a testing of waters, and then broke open into something desperate and starving. Nico's hand left hers and tangled in her hair, tilting her head back to deepen the angle. Ava's hand slid up his bare chest, her fingers curling into the muscles of his shoulders, pulling him down to her. He tasted of whiskey and danger. She tasted of sweetness and hope. The contrast was intoxicating. Nico's other hand slid down to her waist, gripping her possessively, hauling her body flush against his. Ava gasped into his mouth as she felt the hard planes of his chest against her. The kiss grew urgent, a frantic rhythm of lips and tongues, both of them clinging to the sensation as if it were the only solid thing in a world that was rapidly spinning out of control. For a minute, there was no mob war, no Marcus Vance, no fear. There was only the friction of skin on skin, the sound of their ragged breathing, and the overwhelming realization that this fire between them was inevitable. Nico broke the kiss, pulling back just an inch. He rested his forehead against hers, his eyes squeezed shut, his chest heaving. "This is a terrible idea," he muttered, his voice a growl. "You are under my protection. I should not be touching you." Ava kept her eyes closed, her hands still resting on his shoulders. She felt more alive in that moment than she had in years. "Terrible ideas are kind of my specialty lately," she whispered back. Nico let out a short, humorless laugh. He pulled back further, looking at her with an expression that was half agony, half wonder. He gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his thumb brushing her cheekbone. "I need to clean up," he said, his voice straining for normalcy. "And you need to sleep." He stood up, the loss of his warmth leaving Ava shivering on the floor. He walked to the bathroom without looking back, closing the door firmly behind him. Ava sat there for a long time, touching her swollen lips, listening to the water run, knowing that everything had just changed. The next morning, the air in the penthouse was thick with unspoken things. Nico was already dressed in a fresh suit when Ava walked into the kitchen. He was reading a newspaper, but he wasn't turning the pages. "We need to talk," he said, not looking up. Ava poured herself coffee. her hand steady despite the flutter in her stomach. "About last night?" "About Marcus," Nico corrected, finally meeting her eyes. The walls were back up, but they were thinner now. "He's spreading rumors that I am weak, that I am hiding. He thinks he has me cornered because I am focusing on internal security." "Because of me?" Ava said. "Because I have something to lose now," Nico said simply. "I need to show him that I am not hiding. There is a charity gala tomorrow night, the Children's Hospital Fund. It is neutral ground, but Marcus's allies will be there. It is a show of strength." He paused, taking a sip of his espresso. "I need you to go with me." Ava nearly dropped her mug. "Me? To a gala? Nico, I am a barista. I do not know how to be a mob wife." "Not a wife," Nico said. "A date, a statement. If I walk in there with you on my arm, looking unbothered and untouchable, it sends a message. It tells them that I am so confident in my power that I can bring a civilian into the lion's den and keep her safe." "And if you are wrong?" Ava asked. "If they attack?" "They won't. Not there. Too many cameras, too many politicians," Nico assured her. "But I will not force you. If you say no, I will go alone." Ava looked at him. She saw the calculation. Yes, but she also saw the plea. He needed her. For the first time since this nightmare began, she had a choice. She could hide in the guest room, or she could step out and own the chaos that had engulfed her life. She could reclaim some power. "I do not have a dress," Ava said. A slow smile spread across Nico's face. "I can handle the dress." The dress was midnight blue, silk that poured over her body like water, with a slit that went up to her thigh and a back that plunged dangerously low. When Ava stepped out of the bedroom the night of the gala, Nico stopped dead in the middle of checking his watch. He stared at her, his mouth opening slightly before he clamped it shut. He walked over to her, his eyes devouring every inch of her. "You look," he trailed off, shaking his head. "You look dangerous." "Ava." "Good," she said, lifting her chin. "Let's go make a statement." The gala was a sensory overload. Chandeliers the size of small cars dripped crystals from the ceiling. A string quartet played softly in the corner. The room was filled with men in tuxedos and women in diamonds, a sea of wealth and corruption mingling over champagne. When Nico and Ava entered, heads turned. The whispers started immediately, a ripple effect spreading through the room. Nico offered her his arm. "Stay close." "I am not going anywhere," Ava whispered, gripping his bicep. They played the part perfectly. Nico was the attentive, powerful partner, his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, guiding her through the crowd. Ava smiled, nodded, and let her fingers slip into his as cameras flashed from the press pit. It was a performance, but the heat of his hand on her skin was real. The way he positioned his body to shield her from the room was real. As they moved through the crowd, greeting heavy hitters and ignoring the glares from Marcus's associates, the line between fake intimacy and genuine connection began to blur. "Dance with me," Nico murmured when the quartet struck up a waltz. He led her to the floor. He pulled her close, his right hand gripping her waist, his left engulfing her hand. They swayed to the music, surrounded by the very people who wanted to destroy him. "You're doing well," Nico said, his voice low in her ear. "I'm terrified," Ava admitted, looking up at him. "Don't be," Nico said. His thumb brushed the sensitive skin on the inside of her wrist, sending shivers up her arm. "I have you. I will burn this whole building down before I let anyone touch you." Ava looked at him. The lights of the chandeliers reflected in his eyes. In the middle of this den of vipers, he was looking at her as if she were the only holy thing in the world. She felt exposed, stripped of her defenses, but also cherished in a way she had never experienced. "I know," she whispered. And she did. She knew that he would destroy the world for her. The realization was terrifying, but it was also the most intoxicating feeling she had ever known. The ride back to the penthouse was silent, the adrenaline slowly leaking out of the car, leaving behind a volatile residue of emotion. When they walked through the front door, the dam broke. That was insane, Ava said, kicking off her heels and pacing the living room floor. Did you see the way Marcus's lieutenant looked at me? Like I was a side of beef. He looked at you like a threat, Nico said, tossing his jacket onto the chair. He loosened his tie, his movements jerky. Because you were with me. I could have been killed, Ava said, the reality hitting her late. Cameras or not, Nico, I was a prop in a war zone. I told you I would keep you safe, Nico snapped, turning on her. The cool facade from the gala was gone. Do you think I would have taken you there if I wasn't 100% sure? There is no 100% in your world, Ava shouted back. You told me that yourself. You risked me. I risked you to save us, Nico roared, closing the distance between them. Because if they do not fear me, they come for you when I am not there. I did it because I cannot function thinking about you getting hurt. You're in my head, Ava. You're in my head every second of the day. The confession hung in the air, vibrating off the walls. Ava stared at him, her chest heaving. You are in my head too, she admitted, her voice dropping to a fierce whisper. I hate it. I hate this world, but I cannot stop thinking about you. I cannot stop wanting you to look at me the way you did on that dance floor. Nico made a sound that was half groan, half growl. He reached out, grabbing her face in his hands. Ava, he breathed. He kissed her. This time, there was no hesitation. It was fierce, claiming a release of all the fear and adrenaline and pent-up longing that had been building for weeks. Ava kissed him back with equal force, her hands tangling in his hair, pulling him down. They stumbled backward, knocking into the hallway table, a vase wobbling dangerously. Neither of them cared. Nico swept her up into his arms, her legs wrapping around his waist as he carried her toward the bedroom. Tell me to stop, Nico gasped against her neck as he kicked the bedroom door open. Never, Ava whispered. He lowered her onto the bed, the silk of her dress pooling around her like spilled ink. He hovered over her, his silhouette merging with hers in the dim light of the city coming through the window. I cannot walk away from this, Nico said, his voice raw. If we do this, there is no going back to normal. You are mine, Ava, and I am yours. I do not want normal, Ava said, reaching up to pull him down. I just want you. Nico descended, and the rest of the world, the danger, the fear, the wrong numbers, faded into the background, leaving only the two of them in the dark, finding a desperate, consuming peace in each other's arms. The morning sun filtered through the sheer curtains of the penthouse master bedroom, painting the room in soft hues of gray and gold. Ava stirred, the heavy silk sheets tangling around her legs as she shifted. The space was quiet, suspended in the rare, fragile peace that comes before the city wakes up fully. She blinked her eyes open, her body humming with a lingering warmth from the night before. Beside her, Nico slept. It was a sight she had never expected to see. The terrifying Nico Romano, the man who commanded armies of enforcers and stared down killers without blinking, looked almost like a boy. His face was turned toward the pillow, the harsh lines of tension around his mouth smoothed out by sleep. His dark hair was messy, falling over his forehead, and his breathing was slow and deep, without the weight of his empire crushing his features. He looked unguarded, human. Ava propped herself up on one elbow, pulling the sheet up to cover her chest. She watched him for a long moment, a complex knot of emotions tightening in her throat. There was tenderness, a swelling affection that made her want to reach out and brush the hair from his eyes, but beneath it, there was panic. She was in deep, too deep. Last night hadn't just been about passion or adrenaline, it had been a confession. By letting him in, she had tethered herself to a world of violence and uncertainty. She traced the line of his shoulder with her eyes, realizing that loving a man like Nico wasn't just a choice. It was a risk assessment she was failing to calculate properly. Nico shifted, his brow furrowing as he woke. The transition was instant. One moment he was asleep, and the next, his eyes snapped open, dark and alert. He saw Ava, and for a fleeting second, the softness remained. He reached out, his hand warm and heavy as it settled on her waist, pulling her closer. Morning, he rasped, his voice thick with sleep. "Morning," Ava whispered back, allowing herself to lean into his touch, but the peace was shattered a heartbeat later. Nico's phone, left on the bedside table, buzzed aggressively. It wasn't a text vibration. It was the specific, urgent ringtone reserved for emergencies. Nico sat up instantly, the sheet falling away from his scarred torso. The lover vanished, replaced by the dawn. He grabbed the phone, answering with a sharp command. "Talk." Ava sat up, pulling her knees to her chest, watching the transformation. She saw Nico's jaw clench, the muscles in his back going rigid as wire. "When?" Nico asked, his voice deadly quiet. "Is he alive?" A pause. "Clean the scene. Nobody talks until I get there." "And Luca? Find the leak. This was an ambush." He hung up and tossed the phone onto the bed. He stared at the wall for a moment, his breathing controlled but heavy. "What happened?" Ava asked, fear prickling at the back of her neck. "Carlo," Nico said, standing up and moving toward his closet. He didn't look at her. "He was hit this morning coming out of his house. Ambushed. Is he? He is in surgery. Critical." Nico pulled a fresh dress shirt from a hanger, his movements jerky and violent. They knew his route. They knew his timing. Marcus knew exactly where to strike. He turned to look at her then, and Ava felt a chill go through her. The warmth was gone from his eyes, replaced by a cold, calculating paranoia. He was looking at her, but he wasn't seeing her. He was seeing variables, weaknesses. "There is a leak," Nico muttered, almost to himself. "Someone close. Someone who knows my patterns." "You don't think—" Ava started, hurt blooming in her chest. "You can't think I had anything to do with it. I think Marcus is reacting to every move I make," Nico said sharply. "And the only new variable in my life, Ava, is you." The shift in the penthouse was immediate and suffocating. Nico spent the rest of the day locked in his study or pacing the living room with a phone pressed to his ear. Men came and went. Luca, Rocco, other lieutenants Ava didn't know, carrying files and weapons. They looked at Ava with suspicion, or worse, with pity. She was the distraction. She was the reason the boss wasn't focused. Ava tried to help. She made coffee. She tried to offer a comforting touch when Nico emerged for water. He recoiled from her hand as if it were fire. "Not now, Ava," he snapped, moving past her to look out the window. "I need to think. I'm just trying to be here for you," she said, her voice trembling with frustration. "Being here is the problem," Nico muttered. By evening, the silence between them had curdled into resentment. Ava felt like a ghost haunting a war room. She realized with a sinking heart that their night together had been categorized in Nico's mind not as a breakthrough, but as a tactical error. A moment of weakness that had cost him blood. The explosion came at 8 in the evening. Nico had just finished another screaming match on the phone and was pouring himself a drink, his hand shaking slightly. Ava walked into the living room, arms crossed. "Stop shutting me out," she demanded. "I am not one of your soldiers. Nico, you do not get to sleep with me one night and treat me like a security risk the next." Nico slammed the glass down on the wet bar. "You are a security risk. Look around you. Ava, Carlo is fighting for his life. My operations are bleeding, and all I can think about is whether you are safe in this room. That is not how I survive. That is how I get killed." "So that is it?" Ava countered, her voice rising. "I am just a liability now? I am just a distraction you need to clear from the board?" "Yes." Nico turned on her, his eyes blazing. "In this world, loving anyone is a liability. It gives them a target. It makes me hesitate. I cannot afford to hesitate." The word hung in the air. Loving. He hadn't said it before. He had said he wanted her, that she was his, but he had never used the word love, and now he had used it as a weapon. Ava felt tears prick her eyes, but she refused to let them fall. The hurt turned into barbed sarcasm, a defense mechanism she had honed over years of disappointment. "Well, forgive me for making you human," Ava spat. "I wouldn't want to get in the way of you being a monster. You only want me when it is convenient. Nico, when the lights are off and the world is quiet, but the second it costs you something, you turn into ice. I'm trying to keep you alive," Nico roared. "No," Ava said, her voice dropping to a whisper. You are trying to control everything because you are terrified. But you can't control me, and I won't be your pawn." She turned and walked toward the guest room. "Where are you going?" Nico asked, his voice tight. "Home," Ava said. "My real home, where I don't have to wonder if I am a guest or a prisoner." "You can't leave," Nico said, stepping forward. "It is not safe." "You just said I was the danger," Ava shot back, grabbing her duffel bag from the closet. She hadn't unpacked it fully. Maybe she had known this was coming. "Make up your mind. Nico, am I the weakness, or am I the one in danger?" "Ava, stop." She walked past him, her spine stiff, her heart breaking with every step. She waited for him to grab her arm. She waited for him to pull her back and tell her he didn't mean it. He didn't. He stood by the bar, his fists clenched at his sides, watching her go. He was letting her leave because part of him, the cold, strategic part, knew she was right. If she was gone, he could focus. If she was gone, she might be safer away from the blast radius of his life. Ava walked out the front door, and the heavy lock clicked shut behind her, inside the penthouse. Nico walked to the wall of monitors in his office. He watched the feed from the lobby. He saw Ava walk out of the elevator, her head high, wiping a tear from her cheek. He saw her push through the heavy glass doors and step out onto the street. "Boss," Luca said from the doorway behind him. "Should I bring her back?" Nico watched Ava hail a cab. He watched her get in. "No," Nico said, his voice sounding like gravel. "Let her go. Put a tail on her, but keep it loose. If she sees us, she will just run faster." He turned away from the screen, feeling a hollow ache in his chest that no amount of whiskey could fill. He told himself it was for the best. He told himself he had just saved her life. The apartment smelled stale. It had been closed up for nearly a week. Ava dropped her bag on the floor and locked the door. The flimsy, scratched lock that suddenly felt like a joke compared to the steel bolts of the penthouse. She sat on her couch and stared at the blank television. She tried to tell herself that this was better. This was normal. She could go back to double shifts and bad tips. She could go back to being Ava Collins, barista, but the silence of the apartment was deafening. She missed the hum of the city from the penthouse height. She missed the smell of sandalwood. She missed the way Nico's hand had steadied her at the gala, and the softness in his voice at 3 a.m. when the nightmares came. She had chosen dignity over safety, but dignity was cold comfort when your heart felt like it had been ripped out. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Ava jumped, her pulse spiking. She pulled it out, hoping against hope that it was Nico, that he was texting to say he was sorry, that he was coming to get her. It wasn't a saved number. "Jenna, Ava, please help. My car broke down near the old shipyard turning. My phone is dying. I think a guy is watching me. Please come. I am scared." Ava stared at the screen. Jenna. She checked the time. It was 10:30 at night. Jenna often drove that route coming back from her nursing classes in the next town over. Panic overrode logic. Ava didn't think about why Jenna hadn't called. She didn't think about why Jenna would text her instead of AAA or the police. All she saw was her best friend in trouble, in the dark, being watched. "I am coming," Ava typed back. "Stay in the car." She grabbed her keys and ran out the door. The street outside her apartment was quiet. Ava scanned for the tail Nico usually had on her, but she saw nothing. Maybe he really had cut her loose. The thought stung, but she pushed it aside. She had to get to Jenna. She didn't have a car, so she called a rideshare. The ride to the shipyard district took 20 minutes. The driver dropped her off at the corner of 4th and Industrial, looking at her skeptically. "You sure this is the spot, lady?" he asked. "Ain't nothing out here but rats and rust." "My friend is just around the corner," Ava said, getting out. The taillights of the rideshare faded, leaving her in darkness. The street lamps here were broken. The air smelled of brine and old oil. "Jenna?" Ava called out, clutching her phone. "Jenna!" There was no car, no stranded friend, just the empty, wind-swept street. A prickle of true terror slid down Ava's spine. She looked at her phone again. No service. A van turned the corner, its headlights blinding her. It wasn't slowing down. It screeched to a halt right beside her. The side door slid open with a harsh metallic rasp. 2 men jumped out. They wore ski masks. Ava turned to run, but they were on her instantly. "Hey!" she screamed, lashing out. She raked her nails across the arm of the first man, kicking wildly. "Let go of me!" "Feisty one!" the man grunted, grabbing her hair and yanking her head back. "Get her inside!" the driver shouted. Ava fought with everything she had. She bit the hand that tried to cover her mouth, tasting leather and sweat. But she was a barista, not a soldier. They overpowered her, lifting her off her feet and throwing her into the back of the van. "Welcome to the party, wrong number girl," one of them sneered. The door slammed shut, plunging her into darkness. As the van peeled away, Ava realized with sickening clarity that she had walked right into the trap Nico had tried to warn her about. "Boss!" The word was sharp. Urgent. Nico looked up from the map spread across his desk. Luca was standing in the doorway, his face pale. "What?" Nico asked. "We lost her," Luca said. Nico stood up slowly. "What do you mean, you lost her?" "The tail," Luca said, swallowing hard. "They followed her to the shipyard district. She got out of a rideshare. Then a van. They grabbed her. Nico, they were gone in seconds. The signal on her phone is dead." The world stopped. The ambient noise of the penthouse, the hum of the servers, the wind against the glass, vanished. All Nico could hear was the rushing of blood in his ears. She was gone. He had let her walk out. He had let her leave the safety of the fortress because of his own pride, his own fear of vulnerability, and now Marcus had her. Nico looked down at the glass of whiskey on his desk. With a roar that tore from the bottom of his chest, he swept his arm across the surface, the glass, the heavy crystal decanter, the files. Everything shattered against the wall. "Damn it!" The sound of the breaking glass echoed like a gunshot. The men in the outer office froze. They had never seen Nico Romano lose control. He was the Iceman, the strategist. Nico gripped the edge of the mahogany desk, his knuckles turning white, his breathing coming in ragged gasps. He forced himself to inhale, to exhale, to push the panic into a box and lock it tight. He couldn't help her if he was insane with rage. "Get the car," Nico said. His voice was unrecognizable, low, guttural, and vibrating with a violence that made Luca take a step back. "Where are we going?" Luca asked. "We're going to find her," Nico said, walking around the desk. He checked the gun in his shoulder holster. "And then I'm going to burn Marcus Vance's world to ash." "Do we know where?" "The shipyard," Nico said, his eyes dark pits of fury. "He took her to the shipyard. That is his old stomping ground. Pull every man we have. Call in the favors. I don't care if we have to tear this city apart brick by brick. Anyone who touches her does not live to regret it." The warehouse was cavernous, smelling of rot and wet wood. The only light came from a single industrial work light hanging from a chain, casting long, swinging shadows against the corrugated metal walls. Ava was bound to a wooden chair in the center of the circle of light. Her wrists were zip-tied behind her back, the plastic biting into her skin. Her lip was split from where one of the men had backhanded her in the van to keep her quiet. A trickle of blood ran down her chin, hot and metallic. She blinked, trying to clear her vision. "Comfortable?" A man stepped into the light. He was older than Nico, with a face that looked like it had been carved out of granite and left to weather. He wore a suit that was expensive but ill-fitting, straining at the shoulders. Marcus Vance. Ava didn't answer. She glared at him, lifting her chin. She was terrified. Her body was trembling uncontrollably, but she refused to give him the satisfaction of hearing her beg. "You are the famous Ava," Marcus said, circling her chair. "The barista who stopped a war, or started one, depending on how you look at it." "I am nobody," Ava croaked. "Oh, you are somebody," Marcus corrected, stopping in front of her. He reached out and touched her cheek. Ava flinched violently. "Nico Romano doesn't break protocol for nobodies. He doesn't show up at galas with nobodies. You are his weakness. He doesn't care about me," Ava lied, her voice shaking. "I left him. We fought." Marcus laughed, a dry, rasping sound. "I know. I watched you leave. That is why I took you. Because now, Nico has a choice. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of stale tobacco. He can keep his territory, his docks, his precious empire, Marcus whispered. Or he can come for you, and when he comes, he will be walking into a slaughterhouse. He will kill you, Ava said. The conviction in her voice surprised even her. Marcus smiled, and it was a grotesque expression. Maybe, but you won't be alive to see it. He straightened up and walked back into the shadows. Watch her, he ordered his men, and if she makes a sound, break a finger. We need her screaming when he gets here. Ava sat alone in the pool of light. She closed her eyes, fighting the wave of nausea. She thought of Nico. She thought of the argument, the hurtful words, the way he had looked at her when she left. Please come. She prayed silently, tears finally leaking from her eyes to mix with the blood on her face. Please come. Even if you hate me, just come. But deep down, a colder fear took root. She knew he would come, and she knew that by coming, he was walking straight into the trap she had set by simply existing. She was the liability he had warned her about, and now they were both going to pay the price. The tires of the black-armored SUV tore up the gravel road leading to the old shipyard, the sound like ripping canvas in the silence of the night. Inside the vehicle, the air was pressurized with a tension that was distinct from any job Nico Romano had ever led. Usually, the mood before a raid was calculated, a cold assessment of angles and risks. Tonight, it was a living, breathing thing, fueled by a collective fury that radiated from the man sitting in the passenger seat. Nico checked the magazine of his sidearm for the third time, his movements mechanical. He wasn't thinking about territory. He wasn't thinking about the shipment Marcus Vance was moving or the politics of the council. He was thinking about a pair of terrified eyes and a red dress. He was thinking about Ava. "We are 1 minute out," Lucas said from the driver's seat. His voice was tight. He glanced at Nico. "Boss, if Marcus is there, he's going to use her as a shield." "I know," Nico said. His voice was a low growl, stripped of its usual smooth veneer. "That is why we don't knock. We breach hard. We overwhelm them before they have time to think. And Luca? Yeah. Nobody touches her. If a stray bullet even grazes the air near her, I will hold you personally responsible." "Understood," Lucas said. "In the back." The four enforcers checked their weapons. They had seen Nico angry before, but they had never seen him desperate. It terrified them, and it focused them. They weren't fighting for a paycheck tonight. They were fighting for the boss's soul. Inside the cavernous warehouse, the smell of rust and stagnant water was suffocating. Ava Collins sat in the center of the concrete floor, bound to a heavy wooden chair. Her wrists burned from the friction of the zip ties, and the cut on her lip throbbed with every pulse of her heart. She wasn't alone. 3 other women were huddled near the wall, guarded by men with assault rifles. They were crying softly, but Ava had run out of tears. She sat straight, her spine rigid, staring into the darkness where Marcus Vance paced like a caged tiger. "He's coming," Marcus said, his voice echoing off the metal beams. He checked his watch. "He's making good time. I always admired Nico's punctuality. It is a shame it is going to get him killed." He walked into the circle of light, sneering down at Ava. "You know, I have been watching him," Marcus continued, circling her. "For years, Nico was perfect. Cold, efficient, a machine. And then you text the wrong number, and suddenly, the machine starts making errors. He shows up at restaurants personally. He brings civilians to galas. He leaves his flank exposed." "He is not exposed," Ava croaked. Her throat was dry as sandpaper. "He is focused. He is distracted," Marcus shouted, his composure cracking. "And that is why I win. Because I don't have distractions. I don't have weaknesses." "You are wrong," Ava spat, the fire in her chest overriding her fear. "You think you are strong because you don't care about anyone? That just makes you empty." "Marcus, Nico is 10 times the man you will ever be, even if the world calls you both monsters. He has something to fight for. You just have your greed." Marcus's face twisted in rage. He raised his hand to strike her again. Before the blow could land, the east wall of the warehouse exploded inward. The sound was deafening. a concussion that rattled Ava's teeth. The heavy metal doors were ripped from their hinges as the armored SUV rammed through them, debris raining down like hail. "Contact!" one of Marcus's guards screamed. Chaos erupted, smoke grenades hissed across the floor, filling the room with a thick, gray fog. Gunfire stuttered in the gloom, bright flashes illuminating the smoke like lightning in a storm cloud. Ava ducked her head, squeezing her eyes shut as bullets sparked against the concrete floor. Through the ringing in her ears, she heard a voice she would know anywhere. "Secure the hostages. Clear the floor, Nico." He moved through the smoke like a phantom, his weapon raised, his movements precise and lethal. He dropped 2 of Marcus's guards before they could even raise their rifles. He wasn't spraying bullets. He was removing obstacles. Marcus scrambled back. Pulling a handgun from his waistband, he grabbed the back of Ava's chair, hauling her backward. "Stay back!" Marcus screamed, pressing the barrel of his gun to Ava's temple. "I will blow her brains out, Nico! I swear it!" The shooting stopped instantly. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the whimpering of the other captives and the hiss of the smoke grenades. Nico emerged from the gray haze, 10 feet away. He froze, his gun trained on Marcus's head. His chest was heaving, his eyes wild and dark. He looked at Ava, at the blood on her lip, the terror in her eyes, and a muscle feathered in his jaw. "Let her go, Marcus," Nico said. His voice was terrifyingly calm. "It is over. My men have the perimeter. You have nowhere to run." "I have the girl," Marcus snarled, using Ava as a human shield. "Drop the gun, Nico." "Drop it or she dies." Nico hesitated. It was the moment Marcus had been waiting for. "See?" Marcus laughed, a manic, high-pitched sound. "Soft, you can't do it." Nico's eyes flicked to Ava. In that split second, a silent communication passed between them. He wasn't looking at her with pity. He was looking at her with expectation. He needed her to move. Ava saw the guard to her right, distracted by the standoff. She saw Marcus's grip on the chair shift as he tried to aim at Nico. She didn't think. She acted. With a scream of effort, Ava threw her weight violently to the side. The heavy wooden chair tipped, crashing into the legs of the guard next to her. The impact sent him sprawling, his weapon clattering across the floor. "Run!" Ava screamed to the other women. The distraction was all Nico needed. Marcus, thrown off balance by Ava's fall, fired wildly. The bullet tore through the sleeve of Nico's suit jacket, grazing his bicep. Nico didn't even flinch. He lunged forward, closing the distance in 2 strides. He didn't shoot Marcus. He tackled him. The 2 men crashed into a stack of crates, fists flying. It was raw, brutal violence. Years of rivalry, of hate, of philosophical differences exploded in a flurry of blows. Marcus fought dirty, clawing at Nico's eyes, but Nico fought with the cold, focused rage of a man protecting his life. Nico landed a heavy right hook that snapped Marcus's head back. He followed it with a knee to the gut, doubling the older man over. Marcus collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, blood streaming from his nose. Nico stood over him, chest heaving, his gun leveled at Marcus's forehead. "Do it," Marcus wheezed, looking up with hateful eyes. "Prove me right, kill me for her. Become the animal you are." Nico's finger tightened on the trigger. The urge to end it, to wipe Marcus Vance off the face of the earth, was overwhelming. Then, he heard a sound behind him. "Nico!" It was a whisper, broken and small. Nico turned his head slightly. Ava was lying on her side, still tied to the chair, watching him. Her eyes were wide, pleading, not for her life, but for his soul. Nico looked back at Marcus. He slowly lowered the gun. "No," Nico said, "I am not you." He pistol-whipped Marcus across the temple, a single efficient strike that knocked the rival boss unconscious. "Secure him," Nico barked to his men, who were rushing in to secure the scene. "Leave him for the authorities. An anonymous tip about the trafficking ring. Let him rot in a cell." Nico holstered his weapon and turned, sprinting toward Ava. He dropped to his knees beside her, pulling a knife from his boot to slice through the zip ties. "Ava," he breathed, his hands shaking as he pulled the plastic bonds free. "Ava, look at me." The moment her hands were free, Ava crashed into him. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face in the crook of his shoulder. A sob tore from her throat, a raw, guttural sound of relief. Nico held her tightly, one hand splayed across her back to press her closer, the other tangling in her hair. He buried his face in her neck, breathing in the scent of her, verifying she was real. She was warm. She was alive. "I have got you," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I am here. I have got you. I am so sorry. Ava, I'm so sorry I let you walk out that door. You came," she sobbed, clutching his ruined jacket. "You came. I would always come," Nico whispered. "Always." In the distance, sirens began to wail. The police, finally alerted by the chaos. "We have to go," Luca urged, appearing at Nico's shoulder. "Boss, the cops are 2 minutes out." Nico nodded. He pulled back, cupping Ava's face in his hands. He wiped a smudge of dirt from her cheek with his thumb. "Can you walk?" he asked. "Yes," Ava said, nodding fiercely. He helped her up, keeping his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, shielding her body with his own as they moved toward the exit. In the back of the SUV, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by the dull ache of reality. They were speeding away from the shipyard, the lights of the city blurring past the tinted windows. Ava turned to Nico. In the passing streetlights, she saw the dark stain spreading on the sleeve of his jacket. "You are hurt," she said, her voice trembling. She reached out, her fingers hovering over the bullet graze. "He shot you. It is a scratch," Nico dismissed, though his face was pale. "It is not a scratch. Nico," Ava scolded, tears welling up in her eyes again. "You got shot because of me, because I fell." "I got shot because I hesitated," Nico corrected softly. He reached out with his good hand, catching her wrist, "and I would do it again." He pulled her hand to his lips, kissing her palm. His eyes were nakedly tender, the gold flecks shining in the dark car. "I would bleed a lot worse than this if it meant you were safe." "Ava," he whispered, "do you understand that? Pain is irrelevant if you are not there." Ava looked at him, her heart breaking and healing all at once. She leaned forward, resting her forehead against his. "Don't you dare die on me, Nico Romano." "Not today," he promised. "Not today." The safe house was an hour outside the city, a small, cedar-shingled cottage perched on a cliff overlooking the Atlantic. It was a place Nico kept off the books, a ghost property that didn't appear on any deed or ledger. It was quiet here. The only sound was the rhythmic crashing of the waves against the rocks below. Inside, a fire crackled in the stone hearth. Ava and Nico sat on the plush sofa, wrapped together in a thick wool blanket. Nico's arm had been cleaned and bandaged at a private clinic on the way out of the city. He wore a soft gray sweater now, looking less like a mafia don and more like a weary man who had walked through a storm. Ava traced the edge of the white bandage on his upper arm. Her fingers were gentle, lingering on the skin. "It is beautiful here," she whispered, looking out the window at the moonlit ocean. "I bought it 5 years ago," Nico said, staring into the fire. "I thought maybe one day I would need a place to hide, or a place to stop." "To stop?" Ava asked. Nico turned to look at her. The firelight danced across his features, softening the sharp angles of his face. "I can't keep living like this, Ava," he admitted. His voice was low, heavy with truth. "Not if I want to keep you. And I do want to keep you, more than I want the territory, more than I want the power." Ava's breath hitched. "What are you saying?" "I have a plan," Nico said. "It has been in the back of my mind for a long time, but I never had a reason to pull the trigger on it. I can step back. I can hand the street operations to Luca and Sal, keep them on a short leash, strict limits on what they can and can't do. No trafficking, no civilians." He took a breath, shifting so he could face her fully. "I have enough legitimate assets to build a real life," he continued. "Real estate, shipping, clean money. It won't be easy. I will always have enemies. I will always have a past. But it is a future that doesn't end in a cell or a grave." He reached out, taking her hand in his. His grip was firm, grounding. "I am willing to tear down pieces of my empire if it means I get to wake up beside you without wondering who is coming for us next," Nico said. I am willing to burn it all down for a chance at something different." Ava stared at him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. She saw the honesty in his eyes. He wasn't offering her a fairy tale. He was offering her a fight for normalcy, for safety, for them. "You would do that?" she whispered. "For a wrong number? For the right woman," Nico corrected. He slid off the sofa, sinking to one knee on the rug in front of her. He didn't have a ring. He didn't have flowers. He just had his scars and his promise. "Ava," he said, looking up at her, "I am asking you to build this with me, this uncertain, messy, in-between life. I am asking you to trust me one more time, not as a boss, but as a man." Ava reached out, cupping his face in her hands. She ran her thumbs along the line of his jaw, feeling the roughness of his stubble. She looked at the man who had terrified her, saved her, pushed her away, and come back for her. "Yes," she said. Nico let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for weeks. "Yes, yes," Ava repeated, smiling through her tears. "Not because you are perfect, Nico, God knows you are not, but because you are choosing something else. You are choosing us." Nico closed his eyes, leaning his face into her palms. Then he surged upward, capturing her mouth in a kiss. It wasn't like the desperate, hungry kisses in the penthouse. It was slow. It was reverent. It was full of gratitude and soft sighs, a silent vow sealed in the quiet of the safe house. As they held each other, the storm outside seemed to fade away, leaving only the steady beating of two hearts that had finally found their rhythm. 6 months later. The kitchen of the coastal house was flooded with morning sunlight. It smelled of coffee and something slightly alarming, burnt toast. Nico stood at the stove, frowning at a frying pan. He was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, his hair damp from a shower. He looked relaxed, the lines of stress around his eyes smoothed away by months of relative peace. "You're killing those eggs," Ava said, walking into the kitchen. She was wearing one of his shirts, her hair in a messy bun. "I'm not killing them," Nico argued, scraping at the pan. "I am adding texture." Ava laughed, a bright, free sound that filled the room. She walked over and wrapped her arms around his waist from behind, resting her cheek against his back. "Stick to the logistics, boss," she teased. "Leave the cooking to the barista." "I am retired," Nico grumbled, though he leaned back into her embrace. "I am exploring new hobbies." Ava's phone, resting on the counter, pinged with a notification. She reached around Nico to grab it. She glanced at the screen and grinned. "What is it?" Nico asked, turning around and trapping her between the counter and his body. "A text," Ava said, her eyes dancing with mischief. "From an unknown number." Nico's eyebrows shot up. "Oh?" It says, "Hey, is this the pizza place? I need a large pepperoni." Ava laughed, handing the phone to him. "Careful, Nico. Wrong numbers can be dangerous." Nico looked at the phone, then back at her. A slow, wolfish smile spread across his face. He tossed the phone onto the counter and pulled her into his arms, his hands settling on her waist. "Dangerous," he murmured, leaning down to kiss the sensitive spot just below her ear. "Disastrous, terrifying." He pulled back to look her in the eye, his expression softening into pure adoration. "And the best thing that ever happened to me," Ava smiled, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Me too." They held each other in the sunlit kitchen, bodies fitting together perfectly. Two survivors who had weathered the hurricane and found their way to the calm waters on the other side. Thank you so much for listening to She Texted Wrong Number About Her Date. 5 minutes later, Mafia Boss replied, "Send the address." I hope you enjoyed the journey of Ava and Nico. I would love to hear your thoughts on the ending. Did Nico make the right choice? Let me know in the comments below. And tell me where you are listening from. If you enjoyed this story, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Mafia Romance Stories for more passionate and thrilling tales. See you in the next story.